Good morning, everyone. For those of you, yeah, I know, they're sitting there telling that story about the gift card, and I'm like, don't cry, Mike, keep it together, come on. You got to talk for 30 minutes, don't do this. Well, for those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet before, my name is Mike King, and I'm one of the pastors here at Suburban. And I wanted to start off this morning by telling you a little bit of a story. When I was a kid, when I was growing up, especially in the summers, we traveled a lot for my dad's work. He was just kind of always on the road. And somewhere along the line, my sister and I created this really dumb game where we would have Dad turn the radio on, and we would just take turns trying to sing along to whatever song happened to be on the radio, and whoever managed to sing through the song screwing up less of the lyrics won a point. So we did that for miles and miles. We started with the 60s music that my dad loved, and then we really branched out into country and the 70s rock and pop music and all of that. And the end result of that is that after tens of thousands of miles of that game, I have an awful lot of song lyrics just burned into my head. Now, I regularly forget my PIN number at the bank, and still to this day, I take wrong turns in our neighborhood. So it's not like I've got a good memory for things that are helpful or useful or productive. But if there's anybody out there who's struggling to remember how the chorus to the Platters' Smoke Gets in Your Eyes or, White Stripes' Seven Nation Army, I can totally hook you up with that and help you out there. That's about all I've got to offer, unfortunately. But I'm guessing that when it comes to song lyrics, I'm probably not alone in that, right? A lot of us have songs that we can remember, even if you didn't play a dumb game like that growing up. Songs have the ability to stick with us in ways that very few other things do. I mean, for you, maybe it's a song that's really connected to a significant time in your life or a special memory that you have. Maybe it's a relationship where you have your song together and you remember that. Maybe if you grew up in a church, maybe it's a hymn or a worship song in church that you sang over the years that was just a meaningful kind of milestone for you as you grew. But for a lot of us, these songs and the words of songs have an ability to stick with us through the years, even when we forget things like our wife's birthday, for example, or not that I would ever have done anything like that. Yeah. Anyway, so where was I? Wasn't going there. Yeah, so anyway, we remember song lyrics. And it's interesting, but churches have known this over the years, and they've used it to great advantage. Because, again, if you think about it, for most of the first 2,000 years of the church's history, most people couldn't read, right? We weren't a literate society. So songs were how churches found a way to teach people kind of the basics and the biographies of the faith. They knew that a lot of people couldn't go home, open up the Bible, and read the stories for themselves. So they paid special attention to the songs that they sang because they knew that those words could stick with them, that it could kind of be burned into their minds and their hearts and provide a way to really connect them with what was central to our faith. And that brings us to the sermon series that we're starting today, which is really all about the book of Psalms. So the book of Psalms is found in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and it's actually a collection of 150 poems, many of which were originally set to music. Really, the Psalms, the book of Psalms, is the hymn book of the ancient people of Israel. These are the songs that they used as part of their worship life and their sort of church services together. So these are the songs that they sang. And if I were to kind of think about why are the songs important to us today, they're important for a number of reasons. One is that, I don't know if you know this, but Jesus quoted from the Psalms more than he quoted from any other book in the Old Testament. And if you stop and think about it, that makes sense because these are the songs that Jesus grew up singing. Right? These are the words that were kind of burned into his heart. So as he spoke and as he taught, these are the things that just kind of naturally flowed out of him. And Jewish people to this day still use the Psalms in lots of ways. And the church as well has found meaningful ways to use and engage with the Psalms over the years because of what it teaches us about God. So I really do think that this series can be helpful to all of us today, wherever we may happen to be on our own faith journey. So if you're here this morning and you would already consider yourself a follower of Jesus, the Psalms are just a rich way to teach us more about God, to remind us of some critically important things about him, and to give us hope and encouragement. If you're here this morning and maybe you're exploring the faith, you're kind of interested in Jesus and who he was and what he taught, but you're not quite sure about some of the other church stuff, well, again, the Psalms are a great thing to study because the Psalms were the songs that Jesus sang. These are the songs that really help give expression to his understanding of who God is and what a life well lived looks like. So there's really richness in there for us. And even if you're here this morning and you're not interested in the church, you're not interested in Jesus, you're just kind of here because you got drugged by somebody, the Psalms still can be helpful to you because they offer some really practical guidance and some practical things that we can do to really just live life well. So I really think that there's something for everybody in here. But here's how it's going to work. Each week in this series, what we're going to do is we're going to pick one psalm, and we're just going to dig into it together and kind of read and think, okay, what does this psalm have to teach us about God and about life today? So to get started, I want to invite you to turn with me in the Bible to Psalm 51. If you didn't bring a Bible with you this morning, no worries. There's some red Bibles in some of the seats in front of you. And if it would help you for any reason, you can grab one of those red Bibles, and you can turn to the page number that will pop up here on the screen, just so that you have an opportunity to kind of track along and read along with that together. But let me kind of tell you a little bit more about this series as a whole. So we're calling this series Greater Than. And we'll put an image up in a minute so you can see that, but I worked a little math reference in because I was a mathlete, and I know there's some engineers out there. You'll like it, trust me. But we're calling the series Greater Than because if you stop and think about it, that's kind of how I would summarize the book of Psalms as a whole. Right? The central message of the book of Psalms is that God is greater than whatever we may be struggling with. God is greater than our doubts. God is greater than our hurts. God is greater than the mistakes that we might make. He's greater than our story or our fears or the burdens that we carry. Or even as we're going to see today, God is greater than the sinful things that we do to mess up our lives and the lives of other people. Even if those are big or small, it doesn't matter. God is greater than those things. You know, sometimes in life we deal with things and the stuff that we have to deal with, that we have to navigate through, it can feel so big, so powerful, so overwhelming, that we kind of look at the God and, he's to some of us, he's just kind of words on the page of the Bible, and we think, is he even big enough and real enough to get me out of the mess I'm in? Does he have anything to say to the real life situation that I am in here right now? And the overarching message of the Psalms that you see on every page and every word is that, yes, God is greater than anything you might be dealing with. So here's what I want us to do. Hopefully you've had a chance to turn to Psalm 51. But I want you to notice something. Before you even get into the content of the psalm, like the author provided like a little title, just to kind of give us some orientation. Sometimes the Psalms have this, sometimes they don't, but oftentimes it sort of sets the stage for what we're about to read. And this is what it says there in Psalm 51. It says, "For the director of music, a psalm of David, when the prophet Nathan came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba." Okay, so that's a little title that's supposed to give us a little bit of a context to know what was going on here. And it was written by David when he was the king of Israel, and it was written at a time by David when he was really struggling with how to move forward after making some incredibly tragic mistakes in his life. Now, if you're not familiar with that story, I'll try to kind of quickly tell it to set the stage. So David's the king of Israel, and it's the time of year when the king is supposed to lead their armies out to fight. But David makes a decision to send his army out to fight for him, and he stays in town. And as he's there in town one day, he sees a beautiful woman. And David thinks, hey, I'm the king. The king gets what the king wants. So he sends for this woman, Bathsheba, and he begins to have an affair with her. And things are going great until she gets pregnant. And then David realizes, I've got a problem. Because Bathsheba's husband is one of the commanders in David's army that's off doing the fighting for him. So he starts thinking, well, her husband's not here, and things are going to fine. What do I do to cover up for this? So David sends a message to the general in charge of the whole army and says, hey, I need you to set things up in the battle so that Bathsheba's husband Uriah gets killed. But it needs to look like it just sort of happened in the natural course of the battle. So the general obeys. Uriah gets killed in the battle. David brings Bathsheba in, marries her, and he says everything's good. But the only problem with that, right, is that the people who live with David and see his life, they're not stupid, right? They can do the math. They realize, wow, she's very pregnant for somebody who just got married. I wonder if there's more to this story. And then they start to put two and two together, and they start thinking, oh, well, it was pretty convenient that her husband died. Maybe that didn't happen exactly the way David said it did either. So, people are starting to begin to figure out what's going on. And God speaks to this man, a man named Nathan, a prophet, and he says, you need to go to David. You need to go to the king, and you need to confront him with what he's done and kind of make him aware of this. So Nathan goes to David. He kind of lays out for him what he did in this very brave moment. And David realizes just the scope and the weight of his sins and his mistakes, and he kind of breaks down, and he confesses what he's done, and he asks for God's forgiveness. He wants to move forward from that mistake. And that's what's going on, right? That little title that says, the Psalm of David, when Nathan, that's what it's setting up. That's the story that it's pointing us towards. And then what turns out that we see is that as you read through Psalm 51, this is how David interacts with God in light of this mistake. This is how he asks for forgiveness and chooses to move forward. And it's really a powerful piece of writing. And I think it can be really helpful for us to look at today because it gives us a model to follow of what it looks like when we make mistakes, to try to make things right, to try to find forgiveness and move forward. And I don't know if you guys think that would be helpful or not, but personally I do because I tend to actually still make mistakes. You make mistakes. We screw things up. And because we make mistakes, I think we could all benefit from having some guidance on what to do when we make those mistakes. What does it look like to try to move forward? What does it look like to believe that God is greater than the mistakes that we have made and move forward in ways that are healthy and productive and bring healing to that? I mean, we all do this, right? I mean, I know for me, I can make a long list of the things that I've said that I wish I hadn't said, the things that I've done that I wish I hadn't done. And sometimes those things happen on accident, right? But sometimes we do them on purpose, right? Sometimes we even choose to do things on purpose that hurt people that we really love a lot. I mean, just one little kind of dumb example of that. I remember one night we were sitting around the dinner table at the King house. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And what we would do every night before dinner is we would hold hands and pray. So it was my dad, my mom, me, and my older sister. So we're there and we're holding hands and we're praying. And about 6 inches in front of where me and my sister are holding hands, there's this piping hot casserole dish that mom has just taken out of the oven. And to this day, I cannot tell you why I did it. But during that prayer, I kind of rotated my sister's hand and slowly moved it over and made her burn herself on that casserole dish. So she screams, right? So the prayer sort of comes to this screeching halt. And my parents said, "Why did you do this?" And I lied and said, "Oh, it was just an accident." It wasn't an accident. I meant to burn my sister's hand. I mean, you're laughing at that? No, sorry. No, and I mean, to this day, I really don't know what possessed me to do that, but I did it, right? And it's just a dumb little example. But I made an intentional choice to hurt somebody that matters very much to me. We do that in little things. We do that in big things. And for us, right, as we deal with the mistakes that we've made, sometimes we begin to think, I've made this mistake over and over and over again. Maybe God's not interested in forgiving me again. And maybe he's kind of run the spool out on that one. Or maybe this is so big that I'm just not sure he can help me with this. Or maybe it's whatever. You fill in the blank with however you want to. But one of the messages we often fall into is thinking, maybe God's forgiveness is not greater than what I did this time. But again, the message of the Psalms that we see in every word on every page is that is not true. God's love is always greater than our mistakes. So let's actually get into the text of the Psalm and see how David does this, because this is David's voice. This is him speaking as we read through this. So it starts off in verse 1 this way. He says, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." Just for a minute, let's kind of drill down on that word, unfailing love, because there's some really important things in there. Now, the word, there's an old Hebrew word, Hesed. The Psalms were originally written in ancient Hebrew. And that's the word here that gets translated as unfailing love. And that's a word that I just want you to be aware of as you read through the Psalms, because that word, unfailing love, that gets used over and over and over again in the book of Psalms to try to describe who God is and to try to describe what motivates the way that God interacts with us, the broken people that he loves with this unfailing love. It's just at the very heart of who God is. And David understands that, right? David knows that the very core of God's being is this unfailing love, which is why he even has the confidence or the audacity to go to God and admit that he's done something wrong and hope for forgiveness. It's because he knows that at his heart, God is not this angry, judgmental guy who's up there with the lightning bolt just waiting to get you. No, he knows that at his heart, God is unfailing love. And for some of us, that may be kind of a new way to think about God. I mean, maybe you didn't grow up in church, or maybe you grew up in a church where God was pictured as, sort of off in the distance somewhere. He kind of put the world together, but he's pretty removed and pretty uninterested. He doesn't seem like someone characterized by unfailing love. He seems kind of removed. Or, maybe you grew up in a church, or the picture that you have God from experiences that you've had is that he's very involved, but he's pretty ticked off too. And he's just ready and waiting for his opportunity to smite us all with his mighty smiting or something like that. I mean, sometimes we fall into this idea of thinking that God is just angry all the time and just sort of longing to punish us. But again, that's not the message of Psalms. When God himself chooses to talk about who he is, this is the word he uses. He says, "I am a God of great compassion, a God of unfailing love." Right? And that's why when we read the Psalms, we've got to keep this in mind, because that can give real comfort to us as well today. Because God hasn't changed today from who he was 3,000 years ago when David wrote this. Right? The God whose heart is unfailing love is still the God who's there with us. He's the God that we approach when we make mistakes. It's because of that unfailing love that we can trust that he's not going to, just take us out before we even have a chance to ask for forgiveness. Because that unfailing love is really at the heart of who he is, it reminds us that we've never done too much, right? We've never gone too far. I mean, if I can, everybody, I know we've been talking for a few minutes, if everybody could just look up here and give me your undivided attention for just a second, okay? I cannot overstress the importance of this. If you forget everything else we talk about today, if you forget everything else that we talk about in this series, if you can hang on to the idea that the very heart of God is unfailing love, if you can let that idea sort of root down in your heart and your mind, that may have the potential to change your relationship with him and your life moving forward more than anything else that you see or experience today. So keep that in mind. It's that unfailing love that's the basis for everything that David is about to say to God. And it's really the basis for everything that we have to say to God as well. So with that in mind, kind of as the foundation, I want us to walk through the psalm, because as we do that, I think what you find is there's sort of 4 steps that David walks through. And that's kind of helpful for us, because that gives us a pattern that if we want to, we can try to follow as well when we screw things up, when we make mistakes, when we need to move forward after our mistakes. And the first one, as we see in the psalm, it's kind of an obvious one. But the first step, if we really want to move past our sins and mistakes, is we just have to be aware of what they are. Right? We have to be aware of what we've done and the impact of what we've done and how what that had on others. That's really what happened with David, right? Nathan actually came to him and confronted him about his sins, about what he has done. And sometimes we need somebody else to kind of step into our lives and point out to us, really take the blinders off and help us see the impact of what we've done and why it's wrong. I mean, that's what Nathan did for David. He helped David see what either he couldn't see or what he knew about but just didn't want to admit to himself or to anybody else. And this really is the first step for us as well. This is where we have to start when it comes to moving forward from our mistakes. We've got to know what they are and be aware of them. And sometimes we need another person to come into our lives and to speak into our lives and help us do that. Sometimes all we need to do is just read the Bible, and through the power of his Spirit, God convicts us. Right? Sometimes we just know our conscience, as God works through that, we know that what we've done is wrong. We know that it was a mistake. But sometimes our hearts get pretty hard, and we need somebody to come in with an outside perspective to really kind of call our attention to what we've done and draw us back to that. So here's a question that I want you to wrestle with today and in the days and weeks to come. Who's the Nathan in our lives? Right? Who do we have in our life that knows us well enough and has permission, that has our back, right? That genuinely wants the best for us? But who do we have in our life that can step in when things are kind of going off the rails and we don't see it or won't admit it, and can point out to us the real consequences of the sins and the mistakes that we're making? If we don't have that person, what do we need to do to begin to identify somebody who can play that role for us and begin to develop that kind of relationship? Because we all need a Nathan in our lives sometimes. I mean, I know I can still look back on my life to one conversation, and I really believe it's a conversation that I had where somebody did this for me that literally changed the course of my life in a lot of ways. There was a man who was an older friend, kind of a mentor, who took me out to lunch one day. And about halfway through the lunch, he sits down and he said, "Mike, I want to, this is not just a social visit. Let me tell you what's on my mind." He said, "Mike, you've been working as a pastor in a church for a little while, and I want you to know, I think God's got big plans for you. I think you have some real gifts and skills and abilities, and God can use that, and I want to encourage you in that." And then he said, "But." Anytime somebody says the word "but," it's just not going to go well, right? But he said, "But look, here are a couple of very specific actions that I've seen you take and attitudes that you have sort of shown that are just wrong. They're just wrong. I believe they're sinful when you look at what God calls us to do. And if you don't address these things, if you don't admit that these are mistakes and sins and get forgiveness and then find ways to move forward constructively, you're really just cutting yourself off at the knees. You are never going to be able to do what God is calling you to do. You're never going to get where you feel like you want to be." Now, I drove home from that lunch pretty miffed that we had that conversation. I wrote him off the list, But with some time and some thought and some prayer, I look back on that and I'm so incredibly grateful that he cared enough about me to pay for lunch, but also to bring me out and just say, look, this is something you're doing. It's just wrong. And I know that it doesn't line up with the values that you say you have. I know it's not helping you get in the direction that you want to go. And because of that, I really was able to face some of the brokenness in me and get God's help and get the help of some other people and move forward in ways that I never would have been able to do otherwise. But that's the first step, right? However it's done, if it's just from God speaking to us or reading his word or having somebody else speak into our life, the first step is we've just got to be aware of what we've done and the impact it's having on other people. And then from there, we kind of move forward to the second step, which is that we have to actually confess those things to God and ask him for his forgiveness. Let's look in verse 3, and we'll kind of see how David begins that process. David in verse 3 says, "For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict, and you are justified when you judge." Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys ever have this experience, but do you ever read the Bible sometimes and you read something and you think, no, that's wrong. Like, that's just not right. I mean, when I was studying for reading this, you get to that line where David says, "God, against you and you only have I sinned." I mean, I really just stopped and I said, that can't be true. I mean, think about what David did, right? David got another man's wife pregnant, and then he killed that man. How on earth can he possibly say, no, my sin, it doesn't impact these other people. It's against God only that I've sinned. That's all that I've got to deal with. I mean, somebody's dead, right? Clearly, his sins impacted somebody else. So anyway, I just feel permission sometimes when you read the Bible to say, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's right. But then keep digging, right? Don't stop at that. You got to keep going, because as you keep going in this passage, as you keep working and digging and trying to explore what it is that David is talking about, I think this is why he does that. I think this is why he's saying that. Because in his view, and this is a view that the Bible supports, while our sin absolutely impacts other people and has an impact on their life, every sin, every mistake is first and foremost a sin against God. And here's why, right? God designed the world. We believe that God is the one who set up the guidelines for how people should treat each other, for how vows should be marriage relationship, for how life should be valued, right? That's what he's talking about when he says, "Thou shalt not murder." And David has broken the rules and the guidelines that God himself put in place. And that's why he can say, "God, against you have I sinned. Against you only have I sinned." Now, that does not mean that David doesn't have some work that he has to do to try to repair the damage that he's done with other people, that he has to seek their forgiveness as well. That absolutely is part of it. And as you read through the scriptures, the Bible as a whole, there's lots of passages that talk about how when we've been forgiven by God, we then have to go and try to make amends and find forgiveness from other people. That's just not what David is talking about in this particular psalm. Right? This psalm isn't trying to answer every question we have about forgiveness and relationships all over the place. It has a much more narrow focus. He's really focused just on talking about how God is greater than our sins, how God is greater than our mistakes, and how God's unfailing love can absolutely heal us. In the next verses in the psalm, it presents this really cool picture of what that healing looks like, right? David is confessing his sin, he's asking for forgiveness, and he kind of paints a picture of what he thinks the end result of that will look like. So look what it says here. It says, "Cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquity." I mean, really, David is calling on God to spare him, to forgive him, to erase, and to cleanse his sins. And it's an interesting image that he uses there when he says, "Cleanse me with hyssop." Now, true confessions time for you guys. When I was a child, I did not always pay 100% super close attention to the sermons that I had to go to when I went to church. We were in church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, and I occasionally would take some of those off mentally and kind of tune out. But have you ever noticed, like, we're only half listening? You kind of hear things wrong sometimes. Well, one Sunday morning, we're sitting there, and Pastor Fred is preaching about this passage, about Psalm 51, and he talks about how David's asking God to cleanse him with hyssop. And I was completely zoned out, so I heard it wrong. And what I heard is that David had asked God to cleanse him with syrup. You can imagine, I spent like the next 5 minutes, I was like, I got to read, that's in the Bible? I start looking through it. Because I was just so confused. I was like, if you wash yourself with Mrs. Butterworth, don't you end up dirtier than you were before you got started? Now, obviously, David was not talking about washing himself with syrup, because that doesn't make any sense. Instead, he was using this image of being cleansed with hyssop, which is an image that his original audience absolutely would have understood, and it carried some deep meaning for them, even if it doesn't sort of connect with us at least initially. So hyssop was this bushy kind of plant that grew in Israel at the time. It's probably something very similar to this picture up here. But hyssop had some very specific uses in the life and culture of Israel at the time. So, for example, you would cut it, and when you would dry it, hyssop was used to apply medicine to people, particularly people with leprosy and other kinds of skin diseases. So hyssop was something that was used as an instrument to bring healing to people who were sick, to bring sort of ritual cleanness and purity to people who were viewed as impure because of the skin condition. So when David mentions hyssop, that's an idea, an image that kind of pops up in their mind. Hyssop was also used in the Old Testament story of the Passover, right? When God is delivering the people of Israel from Egypt. They would take the blood of the animal they had sacrificed and use hyssop to put it on the doorpost over their house, which is a way to protect them as God was coming to deliver them. So when David says, cleanse me with hyssop, all these things are kind of popping to mind for the people who are hearing that. Oh, I know what David is talking about. He's talking about being healed. He's talking about being cleansed. He's talking about being protected from the weight and the consequences of the sins that he has committed. That's this picture that David is sort of painting for people. He says, he confesses his sins and he asks that God would forgive him and do this for him. And then all of that, right, when we're aware of our sins, when we confess them to God and ask for forgiveness, that leads to the next step in this process, which is really a beautiful thing. Eventually we actually receive forgiveness from God. We are put back in a restored relationship with him when we do this. Look what it says here in verse 10 as David kind of paints a picture of this. He says, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Don't cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Now, to me, this is one of the most beautiful passages in all of Scripture. And it's interesting because churches around the world will be reading this passage together. This Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, which starts the season of Lent where we move towards Easter. And historically, what the church has done on Ash Wednesday is they've read this passage. They've read Psalm 51. It's a way to sort of acknowledge the fact that we're all broken, that we all are sinful, that we all make mistakes. But God doesn't leave us hanging with just, the first 9 verses of Psalm 51. That reading always ends with this reminder that God can renew us through his Spirit, that we can be restored, right? That's what David is talking about, this idea that God's Spirit would create this clean heart in him, that his Spirit would sustain him and be his constant companion through life, and that the end result of that is that he would experience joy, right? He would experience the joy that all of us were created to live. And for all of us, for those of us who have the privilege of living on this side of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, there's just some incredible weight in what David is saying here. Because David is saying, God, let your Spirit give me renew me. And before the life and death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, God's Holy Spirit would come and would touch people's lives, but it was sort of a passing thing. It wasn't always there. But one of the amazing things, right, one of the results of the resurrection of Jesus Christ is that the Holy Spirit, God's own empowering presence, it now comes and actually lives inside of us. It becomes our constant and consistent companion. Right? It gives us the power and the strength to move forward. And that's why, in a way that David maybe had a glimpse of but couldn't really understand, he says, God, I want you to recreate my heart. But when we put our trust and faith in Jesus Christ, something even more amazing happens. It's what Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians. He says, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Right? It's not just a renewed heart. We are renewed body, soul, mind, and spirit by the love and the power of Jesus Christ as seen in the Holy Spirit. And that can transform every single thing of how we live. It can give us the power to actually live the lives that God is calling us to do. And that's why, especially those of us who live and follow Christ today, we can look back and we can know with absolute certainty that God is greater than any mistake that we might make. Right? If we do this, if we're just aware of the sins, aware of what we've done, if we confess our sins to God and ask him for forgiveness, then we receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. God renews us and restores us and puts us back in a right relationship with him. But if you'll notice, the psalm isn't over yet. There's another step, I think, for David as part of this process of restoration, and we see it beginning in verse 13 when he says this. He says, then I will teach transgressors your ways, so that sinners will turn back to you. Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed, O God, you who are God, my Savior, right? Restore me. And what is it that I'm going to do? He says, my tongue will sing of your righteousness. Open my lips, Lord, and my mouth will declare your praise. Right? From David's perspective, from his point of view, when God shows up, when God proves that he is greater than our mistakes, when he offers us love and grace and forgiveness and we take hold of that, the natural response of our heart should be to go out and tell somebody about what he did. To just say, oh my gosh, you don't understand. I was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I can see. You need to know what God has done. Right? That's how this process ends. When we have that powerful experience of God's love and grace and forgiveness, something in us just says, this news is too good to keep to myself. There are other people who need to hear about this. I need to share this so that other people can experience this as well. So here's a question. What do we do with this? As we kind of prepare to leave this place and move forward, there's one thing that I want you to notice about this poem. If you take an opportunity this week and just sit down and read this poem from start to finish, and I would highly encourage you to do that, you're going to notice something. David wasn't just a good king and a good general. He was really a great poet as well. And he does this kind of little poetic trick as you read through the poem. When you read the first half of the poem, one of the things that you see is that words like sin and failure and transgression, they show up a lot. But one word that doesn't show up very often in the first half of the poem is God. But by the time you get to the end of the poem, words like sin and forgiveness and things, the sin doesn't show up hardly at all. But God's name is all over the place. And I think David does that on purpose. He's trying to make a point. He's like, how do I just put the words of this poem together in such a way that they help make a really wonderful point? And that point is this. Our sin tends to disappear in the same ratio that God appears. The sins that we make, the failures, the mistakes that we make, those things really do tend to fade over time to the same ratio that we begin to have more and more of God's power and his presence and his character alive and evidenced and at work in our lives. So the thing I think that all of us have to figure out today when it's terms with what do we do with this is what kind of things do we need to do? What kind of steps do we need to take to just kind of get more and more God into us so that there's less and less of the sins and the mistakes and the failures? Now, we're never going to get it perfect, right? There's always going to be mistakes that we make. But one of the wonderful promises of the gospel is that our past doesn't determine what our future has to look like. That as God's power works in us and transforms us, we really can become more and more like him. We can grow up into the full maturity and stature of his son, Jesus Christ. That's the promise that we move towards and that we hang on to. So what do you do with that? I mean, maybe you're here this morning and all this talk about mistakes and failures has just reminded you of some things that you have done that you've never asked God to forgive you for. Or that you've never tried to make it right with the people that you've hurt. Or maybe it's the kind of thing that you don't think you can even forgive yourself for. You've tried and you just don't seem to be able to get over it. Or maybe it's a pattern for you, right? It's something that you do and you ask for forgiveness and then you do it and you ask for forgiveness and you do it and you ask for forgiveness and then eventually you just think, why bother? I'm never going to get out of this trap. Well, if that's you, one of the things that I would really encourage you to do today is to take some time and invite somebody to pray with you about that. You know, as the service ends, if you like, you got those doors and hang a right. We have a prayer room. And there are some people who would consider it an incredible privilege to sort of speak some words of life and hope and encouragement to you and kind of inject a little bit more God into your thinking about that. It maybe help you remember that whatever it is that you have done in the past, there is absolutely nothing that is bigger than God, right? God's grace and his forgiveness is always greater than the mistakes that he's made, that we've made. God's grace and forgiveness is always bigger and more powerful than the bad patterns and the sinful habits and the traps that we feel caught in. There is always a way out because God is greater than that. And if it would help you and encourage you to have some people to kind of remind you of that and pray for you about that today, we would consider it an incredible privilege to do that. Or, you know, maybe you're here today and you think, you know, I've found new life in God. I've been forgiven. What do you need to do with that? Well, maybe what you need to do is do what David tells us all to do when we experience that love and grace and forgiveness, and tell somebody about it. Right? What has God done in your life? And who do you know? Who are you already in relationships with through school, work, whatever it may be, who would benefit from hearing what it is that God has done for you? Who would be helped by hearing your story? If you just stop and pray, I'm confident that God will bring somebody to mind for you and will then open up an opportunity for you to talk about that in ways that can be meaningful. And again, this is something that all of us can do. Sometimes we're hesitant about getting into conversations like that with people because they're like, well, what if they ask a theology question I don't know the answer to? Or what if they've kind of watched this thing on YouTube, so they got questions about the Bible that I don't know how to answer? That's okay. If I got questions you don't know how to answer, just say, I don't know. But here's what I do know. I know where I was, and I know where I am now because of what God did in me. All of us can share that with them, and all of us probably know someone who would benefit from hearing that. So here's what we're going to do to close. The musicians are going to come up. I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to sing one last song that is really, I think, fitting to kind of help us center our thoughts on this and really focus in on maybe what it is that God is calling us to do to respond to what we've heard, to respond to this truth that he's always greater than our mistakes. So if you can, I want to invite you to go ahead and stand, and I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing. And we'll just pray that as we sing that God shows us what we need to do to respond today. God, thank you. Thank you that we could be here together today, and thank you that we can be reminded that you are greater than any mistakes that we have made. You are greater than anything that we have done that might have caused damage to our relationship with you or to the people around us. Lord, I just pray that you would do what you alone could do. You would open up the eyes of every person here to know what it is that they need to do to respond to this word of hope and trust and life and encouragement that we have heard today. For some of us, Lord, we really do look at the mistakes we've made and think, I don't know, that may be too big of a one for me to forgive myself or for God to forgive me. Just help us remember, God, that if you can forgive a murderer, that you can forgive us. Even if our sins are somehow bigger than that, they are not bigger than your unfailing love. I just pray, Lord, that as we sing, you would help each of us have an experience with that love that changes us and helps us know what we need to do to respond. Amen.
If you got pain, he's a pain taker. If you feel lost, he's the way maker. If you need freedom or saving, he's a prison shaking savior. If you got chains, he's a chain breaker. If you've been walking the same old road for miles and miles, if you've been hearing the same old voice tell the same old lies, and if you're trying to fill the same old holes inside, well, there's a better life, there's a better life. If you got pain, he's a pain taker. If you feel lost, he's a way maker. If you need freedom or saving, he's a prison shaking savior. If you got chains, he's a chain breaker. And we've all searched for the light of day in the dead of night, and we've all found ourselves worn out from the same old fight, and we've all run to things we know that just ain't right. But there's a better life, there's a better life. Oh, if you got pain, he's a pain taker. If you feel lost, he's a way maker. If you need freedom or saving, he's a prison shaking savior. If you got chains, he's a chain breaker. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can feel it, somebody testify. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can feel it, somebody testify. Somebody testify. chain breaker. If you need freedom, or saving, he's a prison shaking savior. If you got chains, he's a chain breaker.
We're grateful that you all took the time to be here with us today. As we prepare to go, remember, no pressure, but if you want to give to support our partnership with DHS, those are in the baskets as you leave. The DHS folks are going to be out that way if you'd like to talk with them or just thank them for what they do. And we look forward to seeing you next week as we continue this series by looking at how God is greater than our fears. Have a wonderful week.